This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets, episode 168 from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you're subscribing to the Subway to Shea channel on YouTube. You can follow me on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me personally at Ant Rivera 86. And like I said, on YouTube at Subway to Shea, as well as if you want to listen to it, you can do it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify by subscribing there. I hope you guys had a good little break. I know I did. I needed to take a little bit of a breather during the World Series, but happy to be back with you. Happy to be talking New York Mets baseball because we're getting set for the offseason. So what we're going to do today is a kind of little bit of a two-parter. Is we're going to kind of do a year in review of the New York Mets of the 2024 season. And then in the second half, we are going to start looking into the offseason. 24 people in the room right now. Shout out Duran Rivera, G Money Stacks, Jeff Cohen in the house, Carlos Ramos, Rosie K, Jonathan, if I'm saying this correctly, Jonathan Schnekup in here as well. So appreciate everyone in here. I hope I said Duran Rivera as well, my brother from another mother. And I have a special guest to break everything down with me today. My good friend Dexter Henry, sports anchor on New York Post Sports, as well as SNY, update anchor on WFAN and Infinity Sports Network. You got the host of New York Got Game and New York Sports Rapid Rundown, and the lead host of the Urban Fitness Extreme. Dexter, I hope I nailed every single one of those.
You did. That was pretty smooth, man. You nailed all of it. So I appreciate you. How you doing, Ant? You good?
I'm doing great. It was nice to get a little bit of a break from baseball for about a week and just take a breather. I mean, it has been nonstop content ever since that Milwaukee series at the end of the season. I'm not even talking about the postseason, but from Milwaukee to the doubleheader in Atlanta throughout the postseason, it's been content, spaces after every post game. It gets exhausting. It does get a little exhausting, but I love doing it. So that's what we're here for.
I think sometimes people don't think about that, even for the fan content creators, right? Like I think people underestimate, like yourself, who do it at such a high level. You and I talk about this often, but it's, when it gets to this playoff time, it's a lot of work. People expect the content. It's work for me too, but you're just constantly on top of it. And listen, I know what you're saying. We're not saying this to complain. We love doing this. We love when these sports teams go far, have these deep runs. The fan bases are passionate. But yeah, it's tiring. And there's been so much going on in New York sports for myself. I'm kind of, now the World Series is over and the shift is now more to basketball, hockey, and football. I'm a little bit excited because you can breathe, because with the Liberty on their run, the Mets and Yankees on their run, it was exhausting.
It was so weird because even with 2022, when they made the postseason, it ended so quick. 2023, they didn't make it. So it was about a month of, it actually was a month break because there's really not much to talk about until the season fully ends, because that's when you're starting to hear about, what is going to be going on in the offseason. But this year, it was just about a week. You go from the team losing in the NLCS, they have the World Series, and you're right back in it, right after the season's over. So this is going to be a lot of fun today. I'm very excited to kind of recap the season, put a bow on the 2024 season and what was for the New York Mets. Kind of a year in review we're going to do here. And got to start off by just talking about the record by the month for the New York Mets. March and April, they went 15-14. May was that brutal month. And to preface March and April, they started the season off 0-5. That was a tough way to come into the season, but they were able to turn it around and get a winning record in that month. May, they went 9-19. We all know what happened there. June, 16-8, July, 17-10, August, 15-13, and then in September, 17-9. And there was a lot of highlights, right? You talk about the trip to England for the London series in June. You got Kodai Senga coming back for just one game, but it felt like a turning point for the team in that June and July month. August, they survived a brutal month with that road trip that had them going from Anaheim to Colorado and then St. Louis and then Seattle, but they were able to survive that and a crucial series with Baltimore, San Diego, and Arizona. And then you had them in September. They made the playoffs on the last day of the season here. I want to go back to May because that was the last time you were on this podcast. And it was
Yeah.
a big episode, right? It was the end of the month. They just up by the Dodgers. You had Jorge Lopez throwing his glove into the stands. And I think for the first time on this podcast, broke a little bit of news because that's when they released him. And I think he went on for a good 2 hours, breaking it down in the chat with everyone wanting to join in on that. One of my favorite episodes to do. But ever since then, from that start on, from June on, they were basically the best team in baseball. And the fact that they were able to, even though they just slipped into the playoffs, it helped that they were able to, take care of teams like San Diego and Arizona to have that, lead on them when it came to the tie break. And then you go to the last game of the season and where everything took off from there with Francisco Lindor's game winner in the 9th. And you can go on and on. We'll get into the playoffs. But as the regular season for you, the ups and downs, the roller coaster, I don't think I would take back any of what we saw, even the lowlights of, May and the beginning of the season.
One of the things I'll always remember from this season is copping on that episode, Anthony, because I had just the night before I was at the Mets Dodgers game. I was at that game. And honestly, actually, now I think about it, it's actually the only game I went to that I got to attend non-media wise, where I was just there as a fan. So it's that game. Then we're on the air, and we had the whole Jorge Lopez thing. He throws a glove into the stands. And yeah, man, that was a low point. But here's the thing, and I'm sure all the Mets fans would agree in the chat. If we would have said that, hey, they're going to the NLCS, you'd have said, I will sign for it. I think Mets fans would have signed to that point if they could have been 81 and 81 at that point. And I think what's so interesting is, and where I'm agreeing with you, I would not take out the lows because that's what makes sports great. It's sometimes you don't want to have to go through it all the time, but it's that roller coaster wave. It's that things that you can apply to life, right? That show of resilience from the Mets. This is a team that didn't give up. They were 11 games below 500 at the end of May. Anthony and I are talking. We're saying we were legitimately talking about, they need to blow this up. We were legitimately saying this. And I don't take back my comments at times. I thought they should have at the time. I was disappointed in the team. I was disappointed with the performance of some of the veterans. But I will say, I think one of the things I hope fans can learn, and even myself, you have to understand this is a long season. And if you have the right culture in place, things can really turn around. I think this is what this is what the season showed the Mets fans. It's a credit to the front office and David Stearns. It's a credit to Carlos Mendoza for keeping the ship steady, believing in the players, holding players accountable. I think all those things happen. And it makes me, and we'll get into this more, it's why I'm a little bit excited about this future for the Mets, because they had a season like this, because they hit a rock bottom, if you want to call it that, in May, and then bounced back. I think there's so much that young players on this team can build from. I think veterans can build from. I think as a first-year manager and Carlos Mendoza, he can build from off this season. And I think it's because they went through that together. And it's special. And listen, we all love these runs when the teams dominate. 2006, I'm sure, Anthony, it's one of your favorite seasons, right?
Yeah.
As a Mets fan. But sometimes the seasons where you don't expect anything, which I don't think expectations were high for Mets fans this year. You and I talked about this before the season. You were on with me. I was on with you. I think we were in the vein of they could be a 500 team, maybe a little bit above. Maybe they could contend for the third wildcard spot, which is what they ended up getting. But I don't think any of us saw this run to the NLCS. I don't think any of us saw this when they had the terrible record in May. I don't think any of us saw this, but man, what a season. What a fun ride. Whether you're covering it, whether you're a fan, you got to say it's fun. And I think this season can do wonders for the Mets going forward if they can build upon this foundation of this culture that they appear to have set. I think there's a lot of reasons for the Met fan to be excited.
Yeah, and Carlos Ortiz says this in the chat. Although this was an incredible season, I don't want to start the next season the same way. We don't, right? I
Yeah.
know in 2023 it was June that really killed this team, the June swoon, and then it ended up happening in May this year. But they had time to turn it around. They had the personnel to turn it around. It was the right mix. And I think that's where I like where Jeff Cohen comes in here and says Mendoza was great steering this team. Remember, Diaz coming back from surgery had a few blown saves and being suspended, which was ridiculous. And yet the team kept coming together. 0-5, May. All the issues with Diaz, Pete Alonso not being at the top of his game, Brandon Nimmo going into a deep slump, all the issues with the bullpen, everything that happened. And after every game, Carlos Mendoza was able to gather this team and steer them in the right direction where they would forget about the game before, even if it was one of the worst games that they had. And there was a couple of worst games that this team had this season, and they were able to put that behind them and move forward. And that, I think, is why, maybe he could possibly be, like Shea Parking Lot says, a manager of the year candidate here. I would like to see it. I think the work that he did with David Stearns, them working in tandem together, and where David Stearns would come in, and David Stearns didn't mess around when it came to the roster, right? Like, once Joey Wendell got off to that awful start, in years past, we might have held on to him for way too much long.
Yeah.
And you look at this year, got rid of him, got rid of Adrian Hauser. There were so many players that if they did not work, he did not hesitate to get rid of them and move on. Whereas we got to see Jose Iglesias come up and do his thing. Jose Buto became an important part of this bullpen. There was so many pieces to this team. Look, Jake Diekman, he had a moment against the Yankees, but he's been off for most of the season, and they said, we're going to get rid of him. And they moved on from him, and they had other lefties in the bullpen. But those two working together the way that they did was so important, and something that we didn't see from the past iterations of this team when it came to, Buck Showalter and the general manager as well. They just, and we found out at the end of the season that they just didn't work together, him and Billy Epler. So to see the way that this team worked together, and that this hierarchy is at a point now where, you got the Cohens at the top. You have the president of baseball operations in David Stearns. You got Carlos Mendoza. You got the leadership of players like Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo, who held the team meeting that kind of, turned this thing around. You could talk about all the things that turned this team around, right? And there's all the other superficial outside stuff, Seymour Wiener, Rally Pim, Grimace, OMG. This team came together, and if they had to use some of those things, they even talk about the playoff pumpkin once Pete Alonso brought that in. All the things that happened, this team came together and they did great work. And it's a test to the ownership and finally a proper management structure in David Stearns as well as Carlos Mendoza.
Yeah, I think they've been so impressive. And the thing you hit on there that really struck me, and it struck me when it was occurring in the maybe a third through the season. David Stearns, his ability to say, all right, this isn't working, we're moving on. I think that's something that seems very small to people in team culture building, but I don't think it is. I'm a big believer in accountability. I don't care what you do in life. I don't care where you work. If you're not performing, you're not performing. And there should be accountability for that. And I think Stearns showing that is going to really set the tone for this franchise going forward. And players are going to know and respect that. I think just like any other workplace, players are going to know and respect where they stand. Is there accountability? Is there, if I don't perform, this is what's going to happen. This is what the standard is. And I think that, you make a great point in that this might be the first time Mets fans can feel in a while. I'm really thinking about it. Maybe you got to go back to Bobby Valentine days where you felt like the ownership, GM, and front office are sort of connected, right? Like, and that matters. That matters in terms of continuity. That matters in terms of cultural development. That matters in terms of standard. And yes, I forgot who said it, and I apologize. I think it was Carlos. I don't remember who said it, that, Mendoza should better win manager of the year. I happen to agree. I think if he doesn't, it's a crime. I think he did the best managerial job. considering what Anthony just showed in the graphic and the Mets up and down season. Thinks the best managerial job in the National League, keeping a team together. I think a lot of times during the season, Anthony, not we, and I say that collectively, fans, media, everybody that watches the sport, I think sometimes they like to, oh man, this manager didn't do this in this game and he made this decision. And so much of it is more about keeping clubhouses together. So much is about being able to talk to your players, being able to relate on some level to your players from all different backgrounds, and keep that team together and focus on the common goal. And that's the strongest thing I saw from Mendoza this season. I think through a long baseball season, 162 games, the great managers are really good at that. Yes, they'll know the pulse of the team. They'll know, when this guy doesn't have it, when to give him an off day, when to pull this relief pitcher, all that stuff. But I think so much of it is how the clubhouse responds to this. And you got to give the players credit too. That's something else I want to do. You got to give the players credit because this is a year coming off of letting go of Buck Showalter, who I think did a fine job as the manager. Obviously, the second year did not go as well as people would have wanted, but new manager, new president of baseball operations, and the players responded. They have to get the credit too. Tough spot for a first-year manager. This is where I'm giving Carlos Mendoza all the credit. Very tough spot, especially start off on 5, then you have the May that you have, and you get this team to the National League Championship Series. It's only going to make the players believe in you more in your message, in my opinion, as long as you have the right guys that buy in the culture. So, kudos to this the Mets, because I think it's been a long time coming where the fans could feel good about the manager and the general manager, president of baseball operations, that they could feel good about that, and the ownership. When's the last time, Mets fans, you felt good about all three? Be honest. When's the last time you felt good about all three? It's been a long time.
And I'm glad you brought up Bobby Valentine, because he's always been my favorite manager throughout my time of being a Mets fan. And it was the way that he was able to work with maybe not the best players, but he made it work, and he made that team into a good team. He made them believe. And I think that that's something that Carlos Mendoza did. It was a quick turnaround, because 2023, this team was in the dumps. And I was concerned about how the transition would be, because even though the team was terrible in 2023, there was still this connection with a lot of the players, and Francisco Lindor being the leader of this team, with Buck Showalter. That the fact that at the end of the season, they were very upset when he was let go, but they were able to transition with Carlos Mendoza so quickly. And just to see the emotions of this team, I even like the way G Money Stacks puts this. Let me tell you something. As a New York Mets fanatic, I'm proud of them. And he said it on his show, the Excellent Fun Vibrant Talks podcast. It's not about win or lose. It's how you play the game. And Mendoza got them to play some type of way to get them over the top and be this playoff contender, and have them believe in themselves that they could beat Milwaukee, that they could beat the Phillies, and to a certain extent, the Dodgers as well. They gave, as much as the Dodgers ran roughshod over them in most of those games, they did not let them win it at home. They made sure that they took that back to LA, and even in LA, they fought till the end. I mean, they scored 5 runs. That's enough to win a game. So, they fought till the end, and very proud of what this team did as a whole.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the fans should be proud of it. And I think G Money Stacks makes a fantastic point there. And I love your podcast name, by the way, G Money Stacks. Good vibes on that podcast. Love the name. The fans should be proud. He's right. It is about how you play. Obviously, you want to win games. You want to win the game in the games you play, but it is about how you play and pride in that. I think it's just fans want to show up and know that their team is going to give effort. I know the Mets, longtime model, you got to believe. We talk about it, Anthony, all the time when you come on with me, and we've said it throughout the season. But, you want to know that team is going to fight to the final strike, to the final out. And this Mets team embodied that. And I think a lot of it too is they embraced all that other stuff outside, right? They embraced the grimace stuff. They embraced the OMG. That's a clubhouse that shows you they're having fun. They like playing for each other. They're free. Because look, playing in New York is hard. Playing in New York is stressful. There's a lot of expectations. There's pressure. This is a Mets team that has not won since 1986. They're trying to break that drought. They've given the fan base some good moments, but I think what the fans are looking for, and I know you are, Anthony, we talk about this all the time, is you just want to see some sustained success. That's something the Mets fan hasn't seen. Sustained success. There's been blips,
Yeah.
couple years here, couple years there, really good vibes for a while, then it's gone. And I think a lot of that, the reason there hasn't been that is because what I was talking about before. There hasn't really been a strong period of time where you've had the ownership, the manager, and whoever's running baseball operations all in lockstep and feeling good about that. Again, I've said it's been a long time. Actually, there's an argument that there may never have been a time where it feels this cohesive between all
Yeah.
three parties, because I feel like Mets fans at some point were probably, not in love with one of the parties here. So maybe we're talking, I said Bobby Johnson, but we were talking about 86. Maybe we're going back to the 80s where you felt good about all three. So it's really been some time, but how the players are playing, the identity of his team, I'm really excited to see how it grows.
Yeah.
As younger players come into the culture, as free agents come into the culture, are they getting the right free agents that want to be part of this vibe, this energy? That's going to be the key for the Mets as they develop and build. How do they build off this season? Who do they bring into the culture? Who fits? And I think Stearns is on top of that. Like I think that's the reason he's able to not just find value. You got to find guys that are hungry, guys that want to win, guys that fit the right way. I think Sean Manaea is a signing that did not excite a lot of people last offseason, but Stearns saw the value in somebody that had something to prove, somebody that wants to get that last payday. And I think Sean Manaea will get that last payday, and hopefully it's with the Mets. Last big payday, I say, for him. So yeah, man, I like what's brewing around this team. I don't think there's a Mets fan that was hanging their head about their loss to the Dodgers in the NLCS. I don't think it was a Mets fan that was just happy to be there. I think they wanted to win. And the Mets did compete. And I think it matters what you said, Anthony. They did not let the Dodgers celebrate on their home field. They brought it back. They played them tougher than the Yankees, for sure. And yeah, they got blown out in 2 of the games. But, I don't think the Mets fan has anything to hang their head about in terms of 2024, whether it's the regular season or the postseason. Should be amazing vibes going forward.
I think along with the sustained success for me, and we talked about this in May when they had the rough spot, was, even if the team didn't make the playoffs, I needed to see them, inch closer to being a winning team where these free agents want to come here and not just rip us off because Steve Cohen has the most money and they're going to take the most money. I want players that want to play here. And it seems like that culture and that vibe is resonating a lot more now than it did in 2022 when they won over 100 games. Definitely last year when they had the rough season. It feels like the team has built this culture, especially with the additions of guys like Jose Iglesias, Jesse Winker. You can talk about Harrison Bader. You mentioned Sean Manaea, even Luis Severino, who had something to prove this season. It was so much of that. Carlos Ramos says it great. Signs of a healthy and motivated clubhouse. Shea parking lot saying Dexter giving it as straight as the brim of his hat. And then Jeff Cohen saying sustained success will happen now that the Mets have stability in the front office. And they finished the season great, 89-73, third in the NL East, only 6 games back. Third wild card spot behind San Diego and Atlanta, which they had Atlanta and them had tied each other, but they had the tie break. They won the wild card series versus Milwaukee in 3, 2-1 with the Pete Alonso game-winning home run in the 9th. You had the epic 4-game series with the Phillies, thanks to a grand slam from Francisco Lindor. They won that series 3-1. And then, as we mentioned, they lost the NLCS in 6 games to the Dodgers. And I take these playoff losses to heart a lot. Like 2006, that one has, I think to a certain extent, still has not cleared my system. 2015 to a little lesser extent, because I really thought 2006 was the team. And, whether losing to the Yankees in 2000, 2022, that one hurt because they won over 100 games. This one didn't hurt as much because of what you mentioned, just how hard this team played to get there. The 2 weeks that they gave us from the end of that Milwaukee series in the regular season through the doubleheader in Atlanta, through the postseason, there were so many moments in that 2-week span that it felt like I watched baseball for a lifetime, that I didn't even remember Jorge Lopez was on the team and Omar Narvaez and all the problems that we had throughout the season. That 2 weeks felt like a full entire season.
Yeah, it did. It really did. You and I have talked about this before, I think like off air, but yeah, I'm in agreement with you. Obviously I grew up a Mets fan, and '06, you just brought that up. I will argue that's probably one of my most painful losses in sports fandom. And it's crazy because I was talking, this came up the other day. I was doing a football video. I was doing a video on Friday with Brian Costello, Jets beat writer, and we were talking about the Garrett Wilson catch the other day, and he's talking about, and I asked him if it was one of the greatest catches that he has seen in his career. And he said to me, he said, well, a lifetime ago, I used to cover baseball, and I'm not sure it's better than the Andy Chavez catch. And I was limited to football, but he was talking about all sports too. And I said, yeah, except, that one ended in a loss. And I think the reason that loss burns for a lot of Mets fans, I think you and I both agree, is that you thought when that catch happened, there was no way they were losing that game. There was no way they were losing that game. I mean, that is one of the great sports moments that I've seen that didn't end up in a win for the team that it happened to. But this team, this run, the playoff run, yeah, it was exciting, man. How they got in, I'll never forget that Pete Alonso home run. I'll take people a little bit behind the curtains. I was at WFAN working that night doing updates. And my cousin, shout out to my cousin Monique, who's a huge, huge Mets fan. I have the text to prove it. I texted her when Pete came up, and I said, how crazy would it be if he hit a 3-run home run right now? How crazy would that be? A couple pitches later, he does it. There's a bunch of Mets fans at WFAN working that night. I was working overnight. We all ran around the station. I don't remember the last time I went that crazy off of a home run. And that's the beauty of covering sports. Why I do what I do is why I love it. It's you're still a fan at heart. You still love seeing moments like that. I felt so good for Pete with the season he had. Lindor hitting the grand slam against it. These are moments that are going to stick with the Mets fan, that you're going to remember from the season, that I think encapsulates how resilient this team was. I think that's the word I would put in this season, is the word resilient whenever I think of this year. There's other years. '06 was a special year. They dominated the National League. They get all the way to the championship series. They lose in 7 games, and it's disappointing. Something about this season and the resiliency, as I don't keep harping back on this, gives me hope about the future. There's something different here.
Yeah.
2022 was nice. And one thing you mentioned, Anthony, that I do want to go back. I've talked about the 3 parts: the manager, the ownership, and the front office being all in step. And I think something that should not be understated here, and I haven't talked about enough here, is Steve Cohen. And Steve Cohen, you and I, last August, were doing a bunch of videos. You were one of the first people I had on to talk when the Mets started going through their fire sale. And I said, Anthony, how do you feel about this? Should this be going? And you were like me. We were on the same page. We were like, yeah, it's a sunk cost. This isn't working. I think this is the right move. I think it's so underrated that the Mets cut ties and realized it was a sunk cost, wasn't working with Scherzer, wasn't working with Verlander. It was an old team. This was not a team that was going to get them to what we're talking about on the show, sustained success. And they accelerated that by the fact they did not stick in the place they were and say, oh, let's try to run it back. No, let's inject some youth into this team. Let's get some hungry players in this team. Stearns had a vision. And you have to give credit to Steve Cohen for saying, hey, we're going to eat some of this money. We're going to get back some prospects. We're going to try to build up our farm system. The Mets have made no secret about it. They said it. They want to be like where the Dodgers are. That's the goal. The Mets are trying to get to where the Dodgers are, where you have sustained success because you have a good farm system and you're able to spend and bring in the right free agents. Well, the Mets had to start new when they had to turn the page. It could have been very easy for them to say, let's run it back in 2024. Let's keep Max Scherzer. We made this investment. I give a ton of credit to Steve Cohen. Now, it helps when you have a lot of money, folks, to say, and it ain't my money. but I'm sure he still doesn't like, I don't care how much money you have, you don't like eating that money. He didn't do it, and he did what was best for the sustained success for the future of this team. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for starting that plan along with David Stearns and then finding the right people. So the future's bright, Anthony. At least I hope we don't look back at this in a year and then you have me on and we're doing another show and like Dexter said the future's bright and the future doesn't look bright in 2025. But I'm gonna stick with it. I think the future's bright, man.
And it feels different. It just feels different because, Stearns could have easily traded Pete Alonso in the offseason, knowing that he's a free agent, could have got assets for him. But Stearns, this was an evaluation year. He wanted to see, what pieces he could keep moving forward and see how he would go into what really is. This is his biggest offseason coming up. For sure, no doubt. With all the money that's coming off the books, we're going to get into all of that shortly. But this is his biggest offseason because I don't think he's ever had the opportunity to have this amount of money, have this backing from a manager coming off of the NLCS. Making the playoffs now is secondary to me. They have to make it back to the NLCS. I think Carlos Mendoza said that. We expect to be here next year. And, I know it's going to be hard because there are teams like Philadelphia that are going to retool. Atlanta's going to get healthy. You got everyone out in the West. San Diego, I'm pretty sure, is going to spend money. The Dodgers are always finding a way to spend money. So the Mets have to keep up with these teams and figure out ways to bring in these type good players. And as Carlos Ramos puts it, Stearns is not just building based on talent and value, but also in terms of culture, like we mentioned, which is super important to this team because you don't want a bunch of mercenaries coming on this team who really don't, fit what they're doing. Because, as much as Scherzer fit in 2022, it kind of changed in 2023, and Verlander felt more as a mercenary coming in, getting the most out of the money, and ended up going back to Houston anyway in a trade. So you got to watch out for those things. Rosie K saying loves the fact that the Mets, beat many of these teams that mock them and kind of breaking these, these curses, as Jonathan put it. Slaying the demon, as I like to put it, against Atlanta, against Philly, against Milwaukee, where they could never win in Milwaukee, and they figured out a way to do that at the last moment in time. So, great from seeing this whole postseason take place and what the Mets can do. Now, I'm a guy that doesn't like to do grades on players, but I did kind of do somewhat of a tier-based performance for these players. So for me, tier 1 best performers. I put 2 there, and I put a Mets MVP and I put a Mets Cy Young. And for the MVP, we all know he could be the MVP of the league, and that's Francisco Lindor. 2024 batted .273, had 33 homers, 91 RBIs, 29 stolen bases. If he didn't hurt his back, he probably would have had 30-30 again. 844 OPS in the postseason, .275, 2 homers, 8 RBIs, and 877 OPS. And for the Cy Young for the Mets, has to be Sean Manaea, especially after that turnaround in the second half, went 12-6, 3.47 ERA, had 184 strikeouts in 181 and 2/3 innings pitched. In the postseason, although the ERA was 4.74, he had some big performances for the Mets, going 2-1, 19 strikeouts in 19 innings pitched. He just ran out of gas in the end. Your thoughts on what Francisco Lindor did offensively and what Sean Manaea did for this team on the pitching side?
I'm going to start with Francisco Lindor. And I mean, man, that's another thing I remember from this season is his performance. This is one of the best performances by a Met in a single season, period. Because of what he meant to the lineup, how he literally carried this team, the amount of big hits that he had in the regular season and the postseason. I mean, amazing clutch hits. I mean, the only other person I thought Vientos had some big hits in this year. So did Alvarez. Francisco Alvarez had some big hits in this year, but Lindor was consistent when they needed him. I said this before. I don't want to hear any Met fan boo Francisco Lindor again. I don't want to hear it from any of you guys. I don't care if he gets off to a slow start next year. This man has shown you time and time again, he generally will get off to a slow start, but he will heat up. He will show up every day. He will play hurt. He will give it his all. and he is a damn good leader. As good as a leader as we have seen in blue and orange for this Mets team, hands down. I don't want to hear it anymore. This guy was amazing this year. I sometimes think it's ridiculous that he wasn't even a Gold Glove finalist, which bothered me. I still don't even understand that sometimes. He's really good defensively. He gives you his best defensively. He's still tremendous. I'm running out of things. He showed up. He hit the ball. He drove in big runs. I listen, and I see you, Shea parking lot. I hear you, man, or gal, guy. I don't know if it's a guy or gal. I just want to be clear. Shohei Ohtani is the MVP. Shohei Ohtani had an amazing season. I know somebody will push back at me and say, hey, but Ohtani's got more support around him in the lineup, more talent. True, all true. I hear you. But what Ohtani did is amazing. I do think if you talk about value, and I'm very big on this when it comes to MVP because I don't think people vote this way. I would vote this way. If it was me, I think the most valuable person to his team this season was absolutely Francisco Lindor. I think the best statistical performance was Shohei Ohtani, which is why I've long asked for in multiple sports, we should have MVP and most outstanding player. I think those are two different things. I just generally think the media, as my fellow colleagues in sports media, tend to vote for MVP heavily based on statistical performance, outstanding statistical performance, and not value to the team, right? And there's ways we have statistically to actually look at value to the team. You look at wins above replacement, which I think is a fantastic stat for that. And so you look at that. Not saying that Ohtani doesn't have value to the Dodgers. I just think Lindor's was more to the Mets when you look at both teams' lineups, him needing to be there every day, yada, yada, yada. Sean Manaea. Look, this is a guy who was looking to resurrect his career. Absolutely did. Basically became the ace of the staff when Kodai Senga was down. Someone had to step up. I don't think any of us, I don't care how big of a baseball fan you are. I don't care how deep in the weeds of a Mets fan you are. Nobody could have said Sean Manaea is going to be the ace of this team. I did not see it coming. Anthony, did you see it coming?
I did not. I did not at all. I thought he'd be a good 3, good 4, maybe. I actually thought that Luis Severino was going to be the guy that kind of would stabilize himself and get back to that possible Cy Young candidate that he was when he first came into the league. Sean Manaea I thought would be a good 3 and 4, and it was the total opposite. It was definitely the total opposite.
I think he showed you that, and we'll get into this, I know, a little bit later, but I think that he showed you could at least be a 2. And he pitched like an ace, and to step up and take that, and he was the most consistent pitcher throughout the season, hands down. He was amazing, and then in the postseason, he was really good too. It's amazing. You're happy for players like this, and I think Manaea is a good pitcher. Obviously, he's changed some things with his delivery. I think he's figured some things out. I'm very intrigued to see what the Mets would offer him as a contract because he is 33. There are things I'm intrigued about that, but I think I'm always intrigued with a player like that because what does it do for them going forward? What does it do for their confidence? And then what does that do for the team? And what does that do for this pitching staff? Because you had a guy who you thought was, I think Anthony and I were on the same page, 3-4 starter, and it's shown you, okay, maybe he could pitch like a number 2. I don't think Manaea is a bona fide ace. I won't go that far. But I think as a 2 starter, and if you have a healthy Kodai Senga coming next year and you slot him behind that, you're feeling really good. And you're also hoping you can add some other arms because the Mets need to. We'll get to that later. But Sean Manaea was good, man. He was gritty. He was gutty. He was pitching. He was giving you. You felt like he could give you 7 innings. He was the guy you thought could definitely get to the 7th inning and pitch well. And so I agree. I also don't like doing grades, Anthony. So I love that you're doing these tiers. I like that. And I think, yes, Francisco Lindor, Sean Manaea, absolutely MVP and Cy Young of this team, absolutely at the top of the list. I could not agree more.
Look back at Francisco Lindor and just all the big at-bats that he had that everyone talked about that he would not have. You go back to the sick. I can't believe this was even a part of the season now. It was the day he came back sick halfway through the game, and he had the game tying
Oh, I forgot about that.
runs and the game winning
Winning
RBIs as
ones.
well.
Yep.
And then you go to Toronto in the no-hitter in the ninth, where he hits the game tying home run. You talk about Atlanta. And this is all after, the back's been barking. Then he goes and he hits the grand slam. Like you said, there should be no question about this guy's grit, this guy's determination. His leadership should never be in question.
Nope.
This team revolves around Francisco Lindor, and that's what they brought him in for. That's why Steve Cohen signed the deal before he even played a game as a New York Met. He knew what he was getting when it came to Francisco Lindor, and I'm just so happy for him. Coming into, I think it was the end of April, batting 089 and turning it around, and the fans got behind him. It was great to see that as well, cheering him on like the Phillies did for Trey Turner the season beforehand. So great seeing the fans back Francisco Lindor. Great seeing the emotion from Francisco Lindor when the team won the NLCS. I mean, the NLDS against the Phillies at home. The first time the team's ever done that in the postseason at Citi Field. And him getting the fans pumped up and riled up. So Francisco Lindor, to me, leader of this team. You could put the C on his chest if you want to or not, but he is definitely captain material and the leader of this squad moving forward. And with Sean Manaea, the fact that he was able to, I don't want to say turn his career around because there's still a lot to go, but he figured that he needed something of a change from what he was doing. And there was a game that I went to where Chris Sale pitched a gem against the Mets. And he looked at that arm slot, and it was a little bit of a side arm slot. And he's like, let me try this out. And the fact that he tried it out, and it made him one of the best pitchers in the league in the entire second half, where, you were thinking, this is my game one starter in the postseason if we really needed it. He had so many great performances, none better than the performance at Citi Field against Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was in game 3 of the postseason, and seeing him get pumped up and riled up. Just the two of these guys had such great performances. Let me go to tier 2 here, and this is very good. These are the very good players, this season. Jose Iglesias, for one, batted .337, coming off the bench, 4 homers, 26 RBIs, .830 OPS. Mark Vientos, I mean, what more can you say about what he provided? Kind of even jumping Francisco Alvarez in that chain of those, I guess the Mets babies or whatever you want to call them, the prospects there. 266, 27 homers, 71 RBIs, 837 OPS, and no one will ever forget possibly one of the greatest postseason performances from him. 327 batting average, 5 homers, 14 RBIs. I don't know if he took the lead. He definitely tied the most RBIs by a Met in the postseason in their history. 998 OPS from him. David Peterson coming back in the second half, 10-3 with a 2.90 ERA. He was second on my Cy Young list from the Mets. If he would have had a longer season, it would have been better. Luis Severino, 11-7, 3.91 ERA. For the bullpen, for me, Jose Butto, 7-3 with a 2.55 ERA. I know he kind of struggled in the postseason, and toward the end of the week, I think he was burnt out by that time, but coming back from the second half and all the innings that he pitched out of the bullpen was huge. Daniel Nunez, 2-0 with a 2.31 ERA. Say what you want, but Phil Maton in the second half of the season was huge for us. 2-1 with a 2.51 ERA. Those are my tier 2 performers of the very good. Any of these guys stand out more than the other for you? Who do you hone in on here?
All right, 2 for me that stood out this year, but there's a little bit of, I'll say, connectivity with them in that I don't think if you would have told me you were counting on either of these guys at the beginning of the season, I don't think any Met fan thought that. I'm gonna start with David Peterson. Wow, David Peterson. I was at the point where I'm like, we don't need to see this man anymore. We don't need to see him in the hill at all whatsoever. If you needed him, it was kind of like, oh, it's an emergency, you need to call him up. Cool. Good. Maybe he could be good out the bullpen. Fine. But what he was able to provide as a starter, particularly in the second half, and the Mets needing him in that way, wow, just amazing. Very, very impressed by David Peterson. It also shows you got to give the Mets credit too. Sometimes we don't talk about pitching coaches, hitting coaches. the Mets sticking with him, believing in him also taking the opportunity and seizing it. He's another guy where I'm very intrigued as to what this season does for his confidence going forward. I think that's yeah, Carlos. Peterson shocked me. I have to say I was stunned with Peterson. Like, didn't have that on my bingo card, okay? Didn't have that at all whatsoever. The other guy, I think I'm shocked about this guy because of how I saw him grow through the season is what I will say. And then also what he was able to do in the field. And that's Mark Vientos. Also, let's give another credit to the front office and ownership. Brett Beatty didn't have it. Brett Beatty wasn't getting it done. They said, all right, let's give Mark Vientos. Let's give Mark Vientos a shot. All the talk about Mark Vientos was, we don't know what to do. He doesn't have a position. Can't play third. Really better as a DH. Well, when the guy played at third, he was solid. He was all right. He was better than expected. Yeah. I don't know how everybody else feels, and I'd love to hear from the people in the chat. I think some Mets fans will be comfortable with him moving at third. I think you're also fine if he moves to the full-time DH. That's also fine. But I think what you need in today's game of baseball is versatility, right? And Mark Vientos provides you some of that. But then to see him hit through the season, get some big hits, you saw how much guys like Lindor mean to him and the leadership, and Iglesias, who's also on this list, mean to him, which I think matters in that culture for a young player like him. And then for him to do what he did in the postseason, man, I almost forgot. I realized he hit over 300, hit 327, 5 home runs, clutch home runs. He did not look fazed by the postseason at all whatsoever. He might be the player on this Mets roster that, take Lindor and take Manaea aside, that maybe I'm most excited about going forward for him personally, because I also think for him, this was kind of like a do or die season for him. This was I got to get this done now. I got to hit now. I got to show I belong now. I have to stay up in the major leagues now. And he did. And he's shown he's an everyday player and looks like a pretty good one. So again, that's a huge kudos to Stearns for seeing that, giving him the chance, for Mendoza and believing him, for them sticking with him when he was hitting, and not saying we got to get him down. And if the sky's the limit. So for those two guys, in Vientos and Peterson, I think because I didn't expect them to contribute the way they did this year, and the way they contributed this year was such a bonus. And now I see all the Mets fans saying this. They're hoping that there's staying power here, and I think there might be. At least out of the two, I probably feel better about the staying power of Vientos than maybe I do Peterson. But Peterson has a great season to build off of, and has shown that he can pitch like a consistent rotation piece. And if he does, the Mets are cooking with two young players that can really help them in the future.
I think what is most impressive to me about Mark Vientos is he never had any type of prolonged slump. He never let anything get too big for him. As we saw, Francisco Alvarez has struggled offensively. Brett Beatty struggled offensively. That never happened at all this season with Mark Vientos. And I think a big credit to what we saw from Vientos has to go to Francisco Lindor, because, and Carlos Ortiz put it, Vientos worked hard with him in the offseason. Remember all the videos we saw that he went to Lindor, asked him for help when it comes to, playing the field. And we saw a lot of videos of them working together. So big for that. And just offensively, what he did with his power, he had a lot of clutch hits during the season. And you talk about the postseason, the grand slam in LA, the game they didn't win the game, but the game tying home run in the 9th off of Philly. He was outstanding this postseason. And like you, I think I look forward to seeing what he can provide the Mets the most, considering that he's such a homegrown talent. Carlos Ramos saying Mark Vientos has earned his spot every day in the 2025 lineup, which I agree with. We will know eventually where he plays, but he has put in the work at third base, and he will keep improving because he puts in the work in the offseason. I think he gets first dibs at third base. Outside of them getting a free agent or making a trade for a third baseman, if they go in with third base the way it is right now, that's his job to me.
I think it should be, honestly. I really do. I mean, look, part of it is, can you get good value in any sport? And listen, I want to see Mark Vientos, cash in and get paid. He's putting the work, as Carlos said. But can you get good value at that position? Yeah, I don't think the Mets need to go make a major upgrade at third base. And I love the flexibility with Vientos. There's days you can DH him. And I think that's great for him going forward. But I think he's shown he can play third base. And until I see a problem, why change it? He's shown he could hit at the position. He's shown he could field the position. He's fine. He's fine. And we might not have seen the best of Mark Vientos. We may have not. There's just still maybe a little bit more to go. I think he can grow a little bit more as a player. But I think we knew he could hit the ball. Could he hit major league pitching? He hit it at the AAA level. I think it was just about defending a position and whether or not he could be an everyday player. He's shown that to me this year. And so I agree with you. Should get first dibs at third base. I'm with you, man.
So we did tier 2, which was very good performers. Tier 3 are good, but could have been better. So that's where I have Pete Alonso, Edwin Diaz, Brandon Nimmo, and Jose Quintana. Pete Alonso batted .240, 34 homers, 88 RBIs, and 788 OPS. Now, peripherally, that looks great, right? Like those stats look great. But when you watch this team on the daily basis and you look at the struggles with runners in scoring positions in big spots, although he came through big in the postseason, batted .273, 4 homers, 10 RBIs, even took 12 walks, kind of turned his postseason totally different from the regular season, had a .999 OPS. He did struggle this season in big spots. This was not one of his better seasons. Good, but just not one of his better. You go to Edwin Diaz, and I'll preface this by saying, he's coming back from missing all of 2023. I knew he wasn't going to be Edwin Diaz 2022, but I thought he was going to be better than what we saw from him in the regular season. 6-4 with a 3.53 ERA. He had 84 strikeouts in 53 2/3 innings pitched. In the postseason, 1-0, 3.12 ERA, and 13 strikeouts in 8 2/3 innings pitched. I look at Brandon Nimmo as well. Batted .224 this season, very low for him. Had 23 home runs, still got 90 RBIs, which means he did have some big at-bats with runners in scoring position. Kind of total opposite of what we saw from Pete Alonso. 15 stolen bases in the postseason, also batted .220, had a homer and 6 RBIs. The second half was rough for him coming back. I know that him and Lindor got on this thing where they swapped, and Lindor was leading off. He was batting second, and it was working for a while. But once the second half started, we kind of just, I don't know if it was injuries, and I assume it was some injuries to Nimmo that wasn't talked about, that he just wasn't himself. And then he played through the postseason with plantar fasciitis. You could see him limping through. Jose Quintana was 10-10, 3.75 ERA. But for him, what got him into this tier was he was fantastic down the stretch. Now, listen to this stat. He only gave up 3 earned runs in all of September. And I think he had about 4 or 5 starts. To give up only 3 earned runs, man, that was huge for the Mets getting into the postseason. And he pitched the game-clinching games in the wild card as well as the NLDS. So that's how he gets on this tier. From this group here, Dexter, what do you want to own in on?
I'll hone in on Pete Alonso because I think you're right. I think when you look at the counting stats, you're like, oh man, that looks good. 34 homers, but that's even down from him. Pete has shown he can hit 40 plus home runs, OPS being down this year. However, with that being said, I think what also helps him get in the list is that he did show up in the postseason. He had arguably one of the biggest hits in Mets history. He had easily the biggest home run and hit of his career in the series against Milwaukee. So yeah, I think, where this all stems is like, where do you go from here with Pete Alonso? Who is Pete Alonso? What is he? He's going to be 30 years old. How does he fit into the Mets' long-term plans? But you look, I'd be lying if I didn't say that watching him wasn't frustrating this year, particularly with runners in scoring position. Felt like he never got a big hit during the season because he really didn't. He did in the postseason. So I'll keep saying these things. I do believe in this. I think there's sometimes moments in our lives, personally, for athletes, professional athletes, where something could be a switch for you. I've seen it happen before. And I wonder, is the postseason the switch for Pete Alonso? Now, do I think Pete Alonso is going to become a 285 hitter overnight? No. Would like to see the OPS go up, want to see the power go up, and want to see you drive in. He had his doubles went down this year. That was another thing. I think he had 10 less doubles than he did the year before. That's another sign of something I'd like to see get back up. So there's a concern with him. But he had an up and down season. He did enough for the Mets, I think, to fairly be put in this tier. But I do think he's one of the more disappointing players in this tier, along with, I'll say, Edwin Diaz, because I, like you, thought he'd have a little drop off from returning from the injury, but I thought he'd be better than what we saw. So I think next year is a big year for Diaz in terms of bouncing back. And both of these players, if they're still with the Mets, well, Diaz will be, but if Alonso's still with the Mets, we'll see how he bounces back as well.
Shea Parking Lot says, can't wait for the crap list. I don't have one. I kind of put those guys out of sight, out of mind this season. But yeah, that will wrap up the 2024 season, put a little bow on that for the New York Mets here, and only can move forward with positivity here with this team and what they have coming up in the offseason. And that's what I want to get into now with you, because it's a huge offseason. David Stearns, his end of the season pressers, couple of notes coming out of that. Not in a rush to get a GM this offseason. He likes the team that's in place. Obviously, he's in charge, and I like what we've seen from him. So I agree with him. I'm not in a rush to see if he's okay doing it. That's fine with me. The most important thing that I thought he said, and this goes with free agency, we've got financial flexibility. It means pretty much the entirety of the player universe is potentially accessible to us. That's an enormous opportunity. I envision us taking advantage of that opportunity and being aggressive in certain spaces. This roster has to rebuild the rotation. They have to fix the bullpen and put the right pieces in place, and possibly can get, maybe one of the biggest bats in all of baseball if they really want to, with the financial flexibility, as he puts it. What did you think of from what David Stearns says? I mean, I agree with everything that came from him. He's been as honest as possible to me since getting on the job. So I think that this is a big off season, not only for him, but for the franchise, as we mentioned multiple times in this episode.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is a huge offseason. Where I think he's going to toe the line between trying to find some value. I think Stearns will find some value moves again, but I think he also has the opportunity to swing big. Now, we know last offseason they were fine with going after Yamamoto, which was the kind of pitcher I thought they should. And I will keep the same energy for me on this. I think they should also go after Juan Soto. Why? Because he is in his prime. He would totally improve this lineup and add another dynamic to them. But as far as what Stearns says, and I agree with you, Anthony, he's been very transparent, which I think and I think that goes the same for Steve Cohen. Yeah. I think the transparency to the fans matters too. And I think that's all fans ask for, is owners show up and talk when things are good, when things are bad. Same with your president of baseball operations, general manager. You want them to show up and talk. You just want to know. Fans just want to know what the plan is. Do you have a plan? How are you're not going to give all the secrets away, but how are you going to try to go about executing this? I think that's generally what people want to know, and I think that's pretty fair, right? I think Stearns has shown that transparency. Stearns knows this is the most money he's ever had to play with. I don't play. Maybe play is a little bit of a word, but most money he's ever had to use. I want to say play. It sounds like he'll just throw it around and do whatever. But most money he's ever had to use to acquire talent for a roster he has. I do think the Mets, and you think you saw it last offseason, they're not just going to spend money to spend money. I think they know they have the money, know they got an owner with deep pockets, but I think there's going to be financial flexibility. I do not think they're going to be frugal like past ownership, but I do think they're going to be responsible. And I think when they spend money, it's going to be players who are if they're going to go for longer term contracts and big money, it's going to be players in their prime. This is where Juan Soto comes in. I think on players that are in the middle of their prime or towards the end of their prime, you're going to see shorter term deals. Maybe, and this is where negotiations become interesting with a Pete Alonso or a Sean Manaea. That's where it becomes very interesting. But I think he's very aware of what the Mets can do, and I think he's going to try to still find some value. And I think the GM part, what that tells me is that he is not as concerned about it, because I think whoever they bring in that role, I think they will. They want somebody that just fits the culture. I think all these little things, the way Stearns is talking about this, Anthony, it tells you they are really serious about who they bring in. Players, front office people, coaches, all that. And it does. All that stuff matters in the organization, folks. It all matters. It's from the top down. And so I think they'll be very meticulous about whoever they bring in and says, understand Stearns is running the show. You're going to assist with that, but we have to be on the same page. And so I like them taking their time to find a GM. Don't just bring anybody in for the sake of doing it. Bring in somebody who has the same visions as Stearns. Maybe it's somebody already in the organization that they want to promote internally. I think that's actually the most likeliest thing that could happen here.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. I think that that's something that's probably more in line, because especially with, if you remember, trying to get the president of baseball operations and GM in here when Sandy Alderson, came back and was trying to help that process. No one would let anyone talk to these guys. They weren't available. Even David Stearns wasn't available at the time. So I think that they're going about this on the right track with Stearns. He's in charge. We saw him put together a good season. He has the track record from Milwaukee and even going back to Houston as well. So I like what I have seen him do so far.
Yeah, same. And so I think Stearns knows this. I think what Stearns should be excited about, Anthony, is that, look, we heard the talk at the end of 2023 that 2024 is supposed to be like the gap year, and 2025 was the real year. So the Mets got a year ahead of things. And, excuse me, expectations will now go up next year, of course. But I think what the Mets did is what went well for them is that they were ahead of schedule while setting their culture, with young players coming up and being part of that culture. Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, David Peterson, if you want to add into that. Some of the, Jose Buto, players, those things matter because now you've sort of integrated that. Now you could go find and move the pieces. I actually think having a good year this year where they went makes their offseason easier in a way, because they know the frame of this culture and this team, and now it's just, can we add a little couple more ingredients in this so we can cook? And I think they should be excited about this offseason. I think fans should be excited. I think David Stearns should be excited. I think they can sell free agents on being here. You've been talking about this for years, Anthony, as we've known each other. It was about getting this to a point where free agents want to be here. You said that earlier in the show. I agree with you. The only way you do that, I don't care what the sport is, it's culture, man. I know it's a buzzword, but it's culture. People want to see, okay, those guys look like they're having fun over there. The manager believes in them. The front office has their back. The front office holds them accountable. Yeah, I want to be a part of that. Because, a lot of players look in New York and they'll say, I don't want to be there. The fans are too hard. And we are tough. We're tough. We expect greatness. And I think that when they see what went on with this Mets team, the joy they played with, I think that's going to be very attractive to a lot of people. And the Mets just might get that guy out of the Bronx and over to Flushing.
I'm glad you brought up Yamamoto, because I think the courting of Yamamoto is one of the most important things coming into this year, even though we lost it, was the fact that the Mets were willing to pay the most money possible for a person that they deemed a very high talent. And I think is something that's going to happen, when it comes to a guy like Juan Soto. They're not just, giving away a whole lot of money just to get a mid-tier top players like they've done in the past, like a Scherzer and a Verlander, just to get them to come here. Soto is going to require a certain amount of money to get here. The Mets have it, and the Mets will, give him that type of contract that they feel, because he's quite possibly top 3, top 5 player in all of Major League Baseball. They're not going to do that for everybody. They're going to pick their spots when they think that there's a player that's worth that type of money. And Juan Soto is one of those guys. Now, Ron Darling said he doesn't feel that let me see how he put it. He goes, Juan Soto is a great hitter. I've seen him and Aaron Judge had a great season, but one player doesn't make it. I don't know. Maybe you get 2 $300 million players. And then he goes, the Mets proved this season that they have a lot there, and adding to that nice mix is going to be fun. I wouldn't judge it by that. If you don't get Soto, then you have no chance to win. So I got a lot of conversation on this. If people agreed on Twitter, spent all day talking about this with a lot of people on Twitter yesterday about do they agree with Ron Darling? And it was a lot of change. A lot of people think that maybe don't go after Soto and maybe get $200-300 million play, or get a whole amount of players that are up to $300 million or whatever the price tag is for a guy like Juan Soto. But Juan Soto is just a different talent like that to
Yeah.
me. And I don't know how you feel about that. I know, like, obviously the Mets can figure out a way if they don't get Juan Soto, but to me, you have to go after Juan Soto.
Do I think it's doom and gloom if the Mets don't get Juan Soto? No, I don't. Do I think you go after Juan Soto? Absolutely. And for the reasons you said, he is a generational talent. He is a top 3 player. You maybe want to say Judge, Ohtani, Judge, Soto. He's right there. He is right there. He is that kind of guy. He's shown you he can play. He's shown you with the Nats. He's shown you with the Yankees. He's a playoff performer. This guy's not scared of the big moment. I don't think he's going to be scared of the contract when he gets it. Now, look, and here's the other thing I'll keep saying. He's 25 years old. He's a player in his prime. This is the kind of player you go and break the bank for. Sure, you're probably going to give him a 10-year deal. He's going to have multiple opt-outs in it, which I'm completely fine with. A private opt-out after 3 years, maybe another one after 6. You do that in a heartbeat. You worry about that later. When's the last time? I feel like I'm saying this a lot in this episode. When's the last time, Anthony, the Mets had a legitimate chance to sign a generational talent? Right?
Yep.
And look, it's not my money. I'm not spending it. It's Steve Cohen's money, and how he chooses to divvy up or start. They're going to have to make that decision. Here's what I'll say. I trust David Stearns and Steve Cohen to make the right decision. But the fact, to your point, that they went after Yamamoto, a pitcher in his prime, coming over to the major leagues for the first time, who had his adjustments this season, but pitched a beautiful game in the World Series against the Yankees. The fact they were doing that tells you what they value. Players in their prime. I don't think the Mets are giving anybody who's 28, 29 a long-term deal. But you're 25? Yeah, we'll do that. We might break the bank for you. We'll do that. We'll back up the Brinks truck for you, Mr. Juan Soto. We'll do that. Because when's the chance you're going to get a Juan Soto without having to give up any assets? That's the key thing, too, right? There's a cost for everything.
Yeah.
The Yankees now, there's pressure on them to bring him back because they gave up assets to get him. The Mets don't have that. You can add this guy in. You're still developing your farm system. You can bring in another couple of pitchers with that. Maybe that's your offseason, but if you truly believe in your system, if you truly believe in your culture, if you truly believe in what's coming down the road in the pipeline with this Mets farm system, the $600 million or whatever you pay him is going to be worth it himself. It's going to be worth it. So if the Mets were sitting out, let's just be real about this. If the Mets somehow said, we're not going to go after Juan Soto, you know what all the fans would be saying out here? Well, this feels like the Wilpons again. That's what they'd be saying. That's exactly what they'd be saying. And nobody wants that feeling again, right? No. This is the hope that Steve Cohen gives you, but I think it's not just about Steve Cohen having a big bag of money and giving somebody the bag. I think him and David Stearns have an actual plan. I think they know when they're going to break the bank. I think, like you said, Anthony, they know what kind of player they're going to spend that money on. Juan Soto's that kind of player, guys. You got to offer him the bag. If he says no, like Yamamoto did, cool, but there's no shame in that. You can't ever look at Stearns and Cohen and say they didn't try to go get generational talent here. They didn't try to win. One last thing I'll add, sorry for the long response, but one last thing I'll add is one of the things I think is important in sports from ownership and front offices is you want to see that they want it. How bad do you want to win? You know that the Mets fans want to win bad. They've been waiting since 86. And I believe when you listen to Steve Cohen talk, and we know he grew up a Mets fan, this is his team's childhood team, I think he really wants to win. And if you really want to win, you got to go out and get the best talent. And I think he's going to try to do that. Will he always succeed? Maybe not. But I think the man is going to try.
Yeah, he's definitely going to try, especially with Juan Soto. And, you can look at future off seasons and there's not a talent that's going to be as talented as this guy with the money that's being requested. So you definitely have to give this the the biggest opportunity for the Mets here, and try your best to get it done and figure out a way, kind of like what the Dodgers did with Ohtani. Now, I know that's not going to be the same type of contract, all the deferred stuff like that.
Right.
Got to figure out some type of way to convince Juan Soto to want to come here. And you've already seen the culture. You see that they're starting to become a winning team. They have kids in development right now, and they are closer, I think, than ever right now to being a team that could possibly make it to the World Series. So the Mets will do their best, and I think that something will get done. Now, I know that everyone wants to talk about all the free agents. We're not going to do that this episode. All month we're going to get into this, especially going into next episode. I want to stay focused on what we have with the team right now. And SNY put a great graphic, so I kind of put it together. Excuse me. They put a great graphic together of all of the contracts that are coming up. Shout out to SNY for this, but total of 178.9 million coming off the books. You see all the names right there of all the active players that were on the roster this season, as well as the what they had to retain from Scherzer, Verlander, James McCann. Thankfully, that's gone.
I forgot they were still paying him.
yeah. Hauser, Narvaez, all those guys, all the way down to Joey Wendell. And then on the other side, it's the Mets pending free agents: Alonso, Iglesias, Martinez, Quintana. You see them there. Stanek, Bader, Manaya, Ottavino, Severino, and Winker. So I want to play a quick game with you, Dexter, and it's called Resign or Nah. And we're gonna play a quick game of who we think the Mets should resign, who they shouldn't resign. And we're going to start off. You got to start off with the guy himself. Pete Alonso, resign or nah?
Resign, but don't go crazy. So I'm thinking, like, if I'm the Mets, I think fair value for Pete Alonso will be somewhere between $25 and $30 million per year. I think giving him something like a 5-year deal, $140 million, I think would be very fair. But now we know who his agent is. That's a little part of the problem here. But I think Pete, if he looks in the mirror and is honest about himself and where he was this season, what he means to this Mets franchise. I know a lot of fans would like to see him break down Strawberry's home run record. Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll say resign because I'm gonna believe that Pete Alonso can bounce back. I wouldn't give him more than 5 years though. That's my other thing. Excuse me. I wouldn't give him more than 5 years. That's the max I'd go to. I mean, honestly, preferably I'd probably give him 3, but yeah, I'll say resign.
I agree with you. I think 3 to 5 years is perfect for him. I even think your price range too for him was the 25 to around 30 range is right where Pete Alonso should be. Otherwise, he is going to be waiting all the way through January, maybe even to February, just like JD Martinez and the rest of those guys of that Boras Corp had to wait for their contracts to be signed. Got a lot here. Carlos Ortiz agrees. Duran Rivera in there. I know Carlos Ramos says 25 and no more for him. Shea Parking Lot says 5 for 150. I kind of like that. I'll sign up for that.
Fine.
Lane Kerner also saying that as well as G-Money Stacks also agrees with that. Next one, resign or not, Sean Manaea.
Yes. I'm going to say yes in this very quickly. Manaea, he's 33. My only concern a little bit is the age. You talked about earlier him switching the arm angle following Chris Sale, but we saw that work wonders for him. Keep this on the short. Listen, he wants security and he wants money. He knows this is his last chance at 33 to probably get a lot of that. 3-year deal. I haven't thought really about the number for him exactly, but I would say give him a 3-year deal. Pay him he'll be in the second tier of free agent pitchers this year. I think he can profile as a low number 2 starter in this league. Maybe a 3 depending on who else the Mets add. But yeah, I'd give him a 3-year deal. I'd give Sean Manaea a 3-year deal. If that's right. Can I see him pushing for 4? And if I was him, I would too. Yeah, maybe give him something with 3 years and maybe a player option. I'm sure the Mets would want a team option, but I think something in that realm you can see for the Mets. But I like Sean Manaea. I think he's a good part of the culture. I'd bring him back. Yes.
I think for me, a 3-year 60. I think that's something that would be a nice fair deal for him. If, like you said, if he pushes 4, maybe they could do a player option or something like that. A lot of people in the chat in agreement with bringing back Sean Manaea. How about this one? This one's a little bit tougher. Resign or not, Luis Severino.
This is tough. I liked what Sevy did. He was a gamer. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. I think it's the first no I'll say. Pass on him. I think he'll get some money elsewhere. I have a feeling the Mets will say no too. Yeah, I'm saying no to Luis Severino. That's no shade to him because I think he
not at all.
Overall was solid. And I thought he would be solid. He was the one pitcher out of this group I thought was going to be solid this year. I'm going to say no. I just don't. I think when it gets bad, when you get bad Sevy, it's bad Sevy, and there's just too many walks. I trust Sean Manaea and the value in putting in him and his control and his ability and what he's shown to adjust to different lineups. I think he'll be fine. I'm gonna say no to Sevy. I'm gonna pass on Sevy. I think you can put money into the rotation in a better spot, in a better player.
Yeah, I was thinking if the price was right, maybe like a 1 or 2 year deal, but the way he pitched, I'm pretty sure he's going to get more. I think he's going to definitely get somewhere around 3, possibly a 4-year deal if he can. I really like Sevy, and he was one of the guys that I really wanted to come here last year to be around that 4th or 5th start. Obviously, he had to be a 1 or 2 with the Senga injury, right. But with Sevy, actually, with the emergence of Sean Manaea and how well he pitched, I think that was kind of the, nail. I don't want to say nail in the coffin, but I would be shocked if at the very least one of these guys is not in the rotation next year. Like, can we agree on that? Whether it is Manaea or Severino?
I would agree with that. I just think it's more likely that's Manaea. I think the Mets' focus will be more on Manaea. I think we trust Manaea more. Yeah, I think so. But I would be shocked if one of the two weren't back. Yes, I'd be shocked.
Yeah, a lot of difference. Ethan saying he wouldn't extend Sevy, but offer him. I don't know if Sevy has a qualifying offer. I don't think he does.
I don't think so. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I do not think so.
Carl's Ramos saying he's not opposed to it, but it's not a priority. So I think we all are in agreement that Sevy is not a priority coming in to this offseason. Resign or nah, Jose Iglesias.
This is a tough one. This is a tough one too. Because I don't know what he wants. Well, I do know one thing. Jose Iglesias wants to stay up in the major leagues. And he's proven that he could do that this year. I just don't know the money he wants. This is what I'm going to say. Yes, if the price is right. And here's my thing. He's a nice extra infielder to have. You got the good vibes. Yeah, they're not going to be doing the OMG thing forever. I get all that. I understand that. But I do think there's positivity for him in the clubhouse, particularly how he worked to get back to the major leagues. I think that can't be understated, especially on some of the younger Latino players like Mark Vientos. I think that was huge too. There's just there's a grit and winning mentality I like around with Jose Iglesias, and he's the kind of guy that's like, I want that guy in my clubhouse. He's that kind of dude. If you can get him on another 1-year deal, a 2-year deal, maybe a deal with a team option, which is something I could see, bring him back.
And you look at the stats around him and the teams he's been on, he's always had that grit. He's always made his teams better as playoff teams and all that. And I think for me, a major league deal for him for sure. And to be coming off of that bench, that depth that we need. I don't want him starting every day. You saw as we got towards the postseason, he started to tire out there. So he is for me, a platoon bench guy along the lines as well as this guy for me. Same thing. I want him back as well. And that's Jesse Winker. I like what I saw from him in the postseason. He brings a different kind of grit and energy to this team, more of a toughness, more of a get under the other team's nerves. And that's something that's been missing from this team. So I'm also Jose Iglesias, yes for me. Jesse Winker, yes for me as well. But how about you? Resign or not for Jesse Winker?
I'm with Jesse Winker for the same reasons. I like a little antagonist on the team. I always like that. So excuse me. I bring him back. I think these are players that are going to be low-cost moves that can have good values on that. Maybe you get them a year deal with a team option or a player option. I think these are low-cost moves the Mets can make that fit into their culture and guys you need to fill in off the bench. You want to have a good bench, and you have guys who want to be here and be off the bench. I say do it, bring them back. So I'm going to say yes to Jesse Winker as well.
For the bullpen, re-sign or nah, Ryan Stanek.
No. I'm going to pass on Stanek. I thought he was okay up and down at certain points. And see, bullpen is tough for me, Anthony, because with pens, you sometimes never know what you're getting year to year. You never know. And so sometimes, and I think the Mets have shown this, I'm fine with mixing them up. You know, the guys I was trusting at the end, I love Buto. I love Phil Maton. I thought he was really good in the second half. Yeah, I could go. I could Stanek. I'll say no. What do you say?
I am on board with re-signing him. I think that his postseason did enough for me to make me believe he's a postseason pitcher. He did it in Houston.
He was better in the postseason. I do have to say that.
Yeah, his regular season, the transition for him coming over here was a little bit rough. But once he got in the postseason, I thought that he did a great job. And as we're seeing, a lot of these bullpen guys are going for a lot of money. If we can get Stanek on a reasonable deal, I will make that deal to go along with the Budo and the Daniel Nunez. And they have to solidify that middle part of the bullpen, because you can't just go to Edwin Diaz in the 6th and 7th inning to get big outs. These guys have to get these big outs. And I think Stanek is one of those guys that can do it. And that's why I would bring him back. On the other hand, when it comes to the bullpen, re-sign or nah on Ottavino, big nah for me. Absolutely
hell no. Sorry, Adam. I know you're a fellow Brooklynite, but I'm sorry. Nah, man. I don't even have to be long-winded on this. We don't need to see Adam Ottavino out there anymore. I think a lot of people were saying that at the end of 2023. They weren't trying to see Adam Ottavino out there anymore. So no, and I think I just want to go back to what you said about Stanek. I thought you made a good point about, I think I was a little bit sour on how he finished the regular season, but there was an adjustment period for him coming over. He was better in the postseason. I do think that's a good point. And if you do think he's a guy who can get you big outs in tough spots, like he did in the postseason, then yeah, I think I'd be fine with bringing him back, and he could stabilize the other two guys you mentioned, the Daniel Nunez and Jose Buto, in that bullpen. So I can see that. Adam Ottavino, hell no. No, we're good. Adam, thank you for your service. We appreciate you, but it is time. It is time.
Yeah, it might be time for him to go back to SNY. He had that little short spurt where he was on SNY for a little bit. He might be that might be his next place.
I said that now, and I might see Adam Ottavino around the office, and if I do, I will tell him thank you for your service. I will do that.
Last pitcher on our list here: re-sign or not, Jose Quintana.
Oh yeah, man, I almost forgot about him being a free agent. I say no. I think if you're going to go Manaya, I'll even say I think I'd rather bring back Sevy than I do Quintana. I think Quintana has served his purpose. I just don't. Two things. I don't trust him to be able to pitch through a full season. Quintana's now 36, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm going to say no. I liked Jose Quintana. I liked that signing a couple years ago. I thought it was a good signing, but I just think you got to get a little younger in the rotation, and I think it's time to move on from him. I still think Quintana can pitch. I want to be very clear. I think he can help a team. I just think for this Mets team of where they're going and where they're at, I don't think he fits this roster anymore.
Yeah, it's a nah for me too, with Jose Quintana, unless, we are coming down to the last, signings of starting pitchers and you need depth. Like, he cannot be your number 1, number 2 starting pitcher. Like, he had to start off the season as the number 1 with all the injuries that the Mets had. He cannot be that guy. He's not an ace. He's not a guy that's going to blow batters away. So for me, if Quintana is going to be that 4th or 5th guy, and now at this point in time, like, it's probably David Peterson's time to be that 4th or 5th guy and solidify that rotation. I don't believe in Tyler McGill. I think he's just a depth option when you need someone in a pinch. But for me, I think you're moving on, and David Peterson's the younger version of this that you're going to need moving forward. Two more players I have left, and they're on the offensive side. Re-sign or nah for J.D. Martinez. I mean, I'm pretty sure we're both in the opinion of nah here, because I think it's time. I think Father Time has come for him.
Father Time has comes for us all. J.D. Martinez, thank you for your service too. He should not be unmentioned in that he was huge in helping this Mets lineup, particularly in the beginning of the season, particularly in the time when they were turning things around after that terrible May. He hit really well. But we saw through the playoffs, struggling a little bit. And he got his, one last year as a DH. It's also, this is another thing. I'm just going to say the Mets, where they are, they need to They don't want to be too old. So some of the older players, I think they're going to cut some of the ties and get some younger veterans in there. And I think JD Martinez. So no, JD Martinez, no for me. But that was a good sign. That was a good signing by Stearns. We just have to say for this season, it was a good signing.
It was a good signing, especially for the price that they got him for. What he did for the team from June till about, I want to say, August, he was a big part of the offense and what they had. By the time we got to the end of September and the postseason, he was pretty much, done. And Jesse Winker, took over that role. And I think the Mets were, I want to say 7-2 in the postseason with Jesse Winker as the DH, opposed to having JD Martinez. He just, the time has come for him. And I think even at the beginning of the season, he said if he wasn't signed, he was going to retire. So I think that we are coming to that. This one, I don't know how difficult this is, but Harrison Bader. Now, we always need depth in the outfield. We saw with Brandon Nimmo's injury and Marte not always 100% healthy. Obviously, the Mets are going to go after Soto as their number one target in the outfield. There's also Anthony Santander out there as a backup option as well. Where's your stance on Harrison Bader? Because I think we know he's like that 240 type guy, but he'll provide you with great defense. I think to me, if he's coming off the bench, that's more of a re-sign for me. But as a starter to be playing every day, that's a nah for me.
It's a no for me too. If he's your fourth outfielder, fantastic. But I don't think it's what the Mets need right now. They need somebody, I think, in center field that maybe isn't the Gold Glove caliber level that Harrison Bader is, because he's tremendous out there defensively. But they need somebody. They need to add somebody into the outfield with a little bit more pop. Starling Marte, older. You need to inject some youth and some pop into the outfield. With somebody that can play reasonably good defense. Doesn't have to be Gold Glove level defense. And this is why you're trying to go get a Juan Soto or Santander. This is a no for me. It just doesn't fit. He was a great sign for what the Mets needed last year, but the needs have changed. Things done changed. And I think Harrison Bader can obviously still help a team, but I have a feeling he's not going to want to be a fourth outfielder and probably not here. So, yeah, it's a no for me. The Mets have to upgrade their outfield, and he's not going to be a way of doing that.
Yeah, they definitely do. And also, I think we have one more year, as Shea Parkland is putting in, one more year of Tyrone Taylor, who had, I thought, a pretty good season as that backup outfielder and being depth. Ethan saying he'd rather have Jet Williams or even Drew Gilbert, who's been talked about a lot during this Arizona Fall League, about having them kind of be the new guys coming up as our Mets prospects. Shout out to everyone in the chat for putting their input in here as well. Always appreciate you guys. One last thing that I want to wrap up with, latest news and happenings. The Mets did make a signing. They signed right-handed pitcher Dylan Covey to a one-year major league deal, probably depth for the bullpen. He's 33 years old. Career 6.18 ERA, and he did not pitch last season in the major leagues, but in 2023 with I think it was the Phillies, who was 1-3 with a 3.69 ERA, and from July on of 2024, he had a 2.66 ERA. Bullpen depth, and it's what David Stearns basically does, right? Like, I mean, he's always looking for arms and always looking to bring up some type of bullpen piece.
Yeah, and look, this is another player, as you just mentioned, didn't pitch last year, but did pitch well in the second half of 2023. He's got something to prove. Let's see how he is when he comes into spring training. I have no idea. I like this move. It's a low cost move. It's early in the offseason move. It shows you how on top of these things David Stearns is and looking for their value, because if you get a great year out of him, and you talked about shoring the middle innings in that bullpen, well, now you're cooking. So I think he's a name to keep an eye on, see how he's pitching in spring training, and he's able to make this roster. And another good job by Stearns. We'll see how that pans out.
Dexter, this has been a fun episode. It's always fun having you on. Let me just put that. I mean, these episodes are always great. We always have the chat going live up here. We have 125 people in the room. The chat was, I can't name everyone in here, but you guys know who you are. You guys add a lot of input in here, and I'm always thankful and grateful for everyone being a part of this episode. Even on a Sunday morning, you got football getting ready. You mentioned it. Hockey, basketball is alive and well into their seasons. But the big offseason for the Mets begins on Monday, because that's when free agency begins. I don't think things are going to happen so quickly, so fast, especially with a lot of the big free agents, especially Boris's people. But we will throughout this offseason. We will be on it. We will be talking about it. And just let everyone know, Dexter, what you got coming up, SNY and everything you got going on.
Yeah, we're right now in the basketball season heating up. New York Got Game, my basketball show. New episode coming out tomorrow. We got Stephen Bondi talking about the Knicks. Might do some Nets talk. I haven't fully decided yet.
And you got special Knicks episodes of that
yes,
show.
And we do live. We go live. We do a live show now every week on every Thursday. Sometimes it'll be Wednesdays, but most times it'll be Thursdays. This Thursday will be at 7:30. Myself and my guy Brian Fonseca have joined us. We had our friend of this show, friend of all my shows, Al Cintron, was on with me last week, which is good. So we do those every Thursday. You can check out to that. This week, I'll let people know we will absolutely have, just this is non-basketball related, we will have a lot of baseball talk. I'll be in a couple times this week. I'm sure Anthony will be joining me this week to talk about some of the stuff in the Mets offseason. So if you like this conversation, Anthony will be back on me some point this week. We just have to iron out some details. So we'll definitely have some great baseball offseason talk. But that's really it right now. New York Got Game in the Flow, New York Sports Rapid Rundown every Saturday. If you want to check that out as well, and everybody can follow me. You can see right there, D Henry TV on all social media platforms. As always, I like to say this: I have an excellent time when I come on the Subway to Shea podcast with Anthony. I believe this is my third or fourth time on here. I love doing these live shows. I love interacting with the fans. Please continue to support Anthony. Please continue to support independent media. It is very important for us to do that in this climate and have different voices and different options. And people like Anthony do such a great job with the content. I always like to say that to the content creators that I love, like Anthony, who does fantastic work. And Anthony is a great dude. We always talk and text off of this. So yeah, Anthony, salute to you. I love how everything's growing. I love the community, and shout out to the community for checking in, because you're the people who make it happen. And you always know Anthony is always going to be on with me more, and vice versa. We're always going to be collaborating and lifting and elevating. So thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
No, thank you, man. And this has been a lot of fun today. Like I said, make sure you like this video. Make sure you're subscribing to the Subway to Shea channel. Make sure you're following Dexter at D Henry TV. You can follow me on Subway to Shea on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me personally at Ant Rivera 86. Thank you for tuning in. If you're doing that, you're subscribing to the Subway to Shea podcast via YouTube. And if you want to listen, you can listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But that pretty much wraps up this show. There'll be a lot of stuff going on this off season, a lot of content coming your way, especially from me, especially from Dexter. Make sure you check it all out as well. But for me, Anthony Rivera and Dexter Henry, thank you so much for joining the Subway to Shea podcast. And always remember, let's go Mets.